Hello, a very warm good evening to all of you and welcome to Unacademy. Welcome to the UCAN session for the portion of the previous 20 days in the area of environment ecology, where we will cover all the important regions for discussion, be it for your prelims as well as mains examination, which includes some of the very unique conceptual areas. For example, the aspect of desertification, the cycle of desertification and deforestation. What do we mean by that? Ocean anoxic events. These are going to be relevant for your mains examination. But at the same time, in this session, we shall also be discussing some of the species which have been in news. For example, red panda. For example, when we talk about the humpback whale, they have been known to cover extraordinary distances in order to improve the migrational skills and in order to exhibit rather the migrational patterns that these species have. So all these topics that we are going to have a discussion for today, along with that, we shall also be taking a look at some of the previous year questions and some of the sample questions which you can expect to be asked in the examination. I do encourage you to ask your doubts wherever any particular conceptual clarity is not being gained. Do feel free to ask the questions. While majority of the questions shall be handled at the end of the discussion, in between the topics as well, we shall be picking up certain questions up for discussion. Having said that, let us take a look at the topics that we are going to discuss for today. So today in total, we are going to have a discussion of 9 important topics. What are the sources from where we are discussing these topics? So here, the sources, just so that you are aware, we are going to discuss some of the articles which have appeared in the Hindu, some of the articles which have appeared in the Indian Express. Majority of the portions or the articles are from the magazine of Down to Earth, so that you don't need to read that voluminous magazine and you can rely on this particular session. And then one of the article there we have taken the help of nature.com as well as phys.org to give you a deeper insight into the happenings in the environmental world. So these are the regions and the sources from where the articles have been taken up. So first of all, Conference of Party number 16 to the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification that was held in Riyadh. So what is the relevance and the key outcome of that conference? Then Ocean Anoxic Event 1A. Now scientists have found out that there was a massive anoxic event spanning across the global oceans, and that had a significant impact on the mass extinctions of the species. So what is that and how do we know the evidence of that? Then agriculture and biodiversity. This is an article which has appeared in Down to Earth magazine, which talks about the research finding in the region of Western Ghats. Now the researchers have basically taken a look at the species of the frogs and their declining numbers. And that indicates that extension of agriculture is damaging the biodiversity of critical habitats like the Western Ghats. Reviving India's forests. Now, this is a follow-up article to the India State of Forest report, which has been released recently. Now, we are not going to discuss the nuances and the details of India State of Forest report because we have put out a separate video, a detailed analysis of that India State of Forest report, which is very, very important for your examination. You can find that in the description. You can also find the link of that video and the entire video in itself on our YouTube channel. So I do advise you, I do suggest to you, those of you appearing for the examination in 2025 or even 2026, please do take a look at that video and prepare your notes accordingly. That is going to be very, very important. Then biodiversity credits, the uncertainties associated with the biodiversity credits. What are these biodiversity credits? Why it is important to restructure the entire methodology and mechanism of awarding these credits. This again is a follow-up article, and Down to Earth has been carrying out a series of articles in the previous editions as well with regards to the biodiversity credits and the mismanagement and misutilization of issuing and utilizing these credits. Then humpback whale has indicated one of the largest migration ever recorded in the whale species. So what is that and why is that interesting? Then little bunting has been cited what is that species, where it has been cited. Same is the case with Malayan night heron and red panda. So these are your species which have remained in news. So accordingly, prepare a catalogue for the species in news. This you can match it up with the previous UCAN sessions as well, and accordingly you should have an entire list of the species in news for the past year, so that you don't have to rush from pillar to post before the prelims examination about which species are relevant for the exams. Now, before we start with the first topic of the day, an announcement for all the aspirants, all the serious aspirants who are preparing for next year and year after that. We have come up with a unique offer of flat 55% off. And for the aspirants of 2026, we have also come up with UPSC Assured program, where we guarantee a kind of success. And if by some reason or the other you are unable to achieve success in 2026, then your preparation for 2027 will be upon us. So that is basically the unique offer. You can use the code IAS English and gain additional discounts. Now coming to the first topic of the day, that is Conference of Parties number 16 to United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. Now for the uninitiated, for those of us who are not aware about what this convention is. So this is amongst the three major conventions which was arrived at Rio Summit, which is also known as the Earth Summit of 1992. Now, we have discussed it previously as well, but a quick revision of that. So when we talk about the Earth Summit in Rio, which was held in 1992. Now, this summit was famous because 3 documents were finalized here and 3 agreements were arrived at. Amongst the documents, you had Agenda 21, you had the Forest Principle, as well as the Rio Declaration. These were the 3 important declarations. This UPSC has asked previously in the prelims and can again ask in the prelims all over again. So what were the 3 declarations? The 3 declarations basically were, first of all, the Rio Declaration, which is the outcome of any particular kind of a summit meeting, any particular kind of a larger conference. You have the declaration in a way summarizing all the important points which have been discussed during that conference or during that summit. So you had the Rio Declaration, which became important. Then Agenda 21, which was asked by UPSC in the prelims previously. It talked about sustainable management of the resources. And then you also had the Forest Principle, about importance of conservation of the forests. Now, while these declarations paved the way for meaningful discussions in the coming years, but much more important was the 3 agreements which were arrived at. And amongst the 3 agreements, you had basically the 3 conventions. 3 conventions. And these conventions, they keep on repeating themselves in news time and time again. So they are always relevant for your preparation. So the most relevant one and the most prolific amongst them is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, UNFCCC. Then after that, now the Conference of Party of UNFCCC was recently held in Baku, Azerbaijan. That was last month rather. Then you have United Nations Convention for Conservation of Biological Diversity. And then you have United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification. We are going to discuss this today. Now, for these, all the 3 conventions, which is the funding agency and the funding body, which is responsible for providing the funds for these conventions, do we have an idea? Let's see how many of us can get the correct answer in this. Which is the funding organization for all the 3 of these conventions? Here, very good, Manikandan. Here you have the funding provided by GEF, Global Environment Facility. Now, initially, when the UNCCD was arrived at that point of time, GEF did not provide funding to UNCCD. But in the 2000s and post-2000s, in order to simplify the funding structure, GEF became the funding agency of even UNCCD. Now here, the trustee for this GEF is the World Bank. World Bank is the trustee. And that is a major sticking point for all the developing nations of the world, because World Bank being one of the Bretton Woods Institute, now World Bank and the funding from World Bank is pretty much determined by on how much good terms you are with the US and the present US government. So that is why the developing countries have always alleged that climate action, biodiversity action, desertification, to combat desertification, all these actions, they are in a way, the funding for that is controlled by the US. So that is why they have always advocated for a special task force for funding for these unique and critical areas. Now, having said that, when we talk about UNCCD, the entire aspect of desertification, what is that? That in itself has changed its parameter, has changed its definition over the passage of time. Desertification means a region turning into a desert. Existence of a desert is not desertification. It is a desert. But a region which was not a desert earlier has turned into a desert. That is desertification. Earlier, almost a couple of decades back, when the concept of desertification was talked about in global arena, in conferences and summits, the understanding was that if you have any desertified land, this desertified land means a lot of sand, lot of loose particles. Now, due to wind erosion, etc., this sand will be carried out and deposited in the nearby regions. Now, those nearby regions will also start behaving and operating like a desert. So, what do you have is an expansion of the existing desert. So, that was constituted, or that was understood as the prime definition of desertification. That is, expansion of the existing deserts in the peripheral areas or the peripheral regions. But in the past couple of decades, the understanding has increased with increased amount of research and empirical evidences, which have indicated to us that it might not be necessary that a region next to a desert will only experience desertification. A region, let's suppose like some areas of Punjab, some areas of Haryana, even they are experiencing desertification. Why? Because of degradation of land. So land degradation leading to desertification, that became a change in paradigm of how we approach the concept of desertification. This is something, again, which UPSC has asked in the mains examination. Now, after this, here, when we talk about the context of it, where will you get the PDF? You will get the PDF of the PPTs, the annotations of that in the link below as well. And other than that, on my Telegram channel also, you will get the PDF of the annotations of the PPTs. Now, the 16th COP under the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification met in Riyadh to address the escalating threats of land degradation and drought. Now, if you observe the wordings as well, focus is on land degradation. Because misutilization of land, changing land use pattern, exaggerated and exacerbated by climate change action, that is leading to more desert formation as compared to expansion of the existing desert areas. Let's suppose you have an existing desert region. Let's suppose the Sahara. Now, you can prevent the expansion of this desert by certain interventions, let's suppose by planting green vegetation on the sides, so that the wind erosion is not that effective. Isn't it? You can do that. That is the concept which is referred to as the green wall, where you plant trees in the vicinity of the desert so that the sand doesn't get carried away. So that is easier, slightly easier to control, and you know what interventions have to be brought about. But when we talk about the productive areas turning into a desert, that is where a deeper understanding and a deeper intervention is required. unsustainable agricultural practices need to be stopped, greater amount of water restoration and water harvesting needs to be brought about. So that is what now the conventions, they are concentrating on stopping and arresting land degradation. With regards to land degradation, there is also in news always the existence of Bonn challenge to arrest land degradation. Right? That is, there you have the Bonn challenge. What is the Bonn challenge? This is brought about by the government of Germany and IUCN. Both of them have brought about this, IUCN and the government of Germany. Right? Now, it is about reclaiming the degraded land. So, it has set a target for the world to bring about 150 million hectares of degraded land into use by the year 2020 and to bring about 350 million hectares of degraded land into use by the year 2030. As per the 2030 pledge, India in itself has pledged to bring about or to reclaim 26 million hectares of degraded land. So that is also about land degradation, to arrest that. Now, the Convention to Combat Desertification has set for itself the concept of land degradation neutrality. What is that concept? Land degradation neutrality. So, the concept is simple, that by the year 2030, the target is that by the year 2030, the world should be able to achieve this land degradation neutrality. What is that? That means every year, whatever amount of land is degraded in one region of the planet or the other, there should be effort to bring that much amount of degraded land into reuse, so that every year no net addition of degraded land happens. So whatever, let's suppose 100 million hectares of land is degraded by the world every year. So the world should make an effort to reclaim 100 million hectares of previously degraded land, so that there is a neutrality which is maintained. So this also is one of the initiatives of UNCCD. It has talked about it previously quite vociferously. Now, then this particular session or the conference of party was attended by a record number of delegates, and the key points of discussion: restoring land which is achievable, requires scalable and equitable solution, partnership across sectors. So here, for the first time, significant clarion call has been provided to the corporate sector as well, to the private sector as well, whose contribution to this area is a meager 6%, to increase their contribution and to ensure that land degradation does not happen. But here, first of all, let us concentrate on the concept of desertification. What do we understand by desertification? So, observe how the definition has changed in the recent times. Desertification is a type of land degradation in which already relative dry land area becomes increasingly arid, means more dry, degrading productive soil and losing its bodies of water. Whatever source of moisture in the form of ponds, lakes, groundwater availability, all of that starts depleting, biodiversity gets impacted, and the vegetation cover also gets impacted. That is desertification. This definition you should know for your exams. Now, here, what leads to this desertification? So basically, combination of factors, climate change being the biggest driver, because the rainfall patterns are changing. The regions which would receive adequate amount of moisture through regular rainfall earlier, those areas are now turning out to be drier for a longer duration, for a longer time period. So climate change, deforestation activities, overgrazing, and unsustainable agricultural practices. Unsustainable agricultural practices like, suppose, when we talk about the region such as Punjab. Now, in the region of Punjab, the amount of rainfall received annually is roughly around 60 to 80 centimeter per year. That is the amount of rainfall which is observed. Now, the crops which are grown in large areas of Punjab include rice and sugarcane. Now, this rice and sugarcane, they are water-intensive crops. The amount of moisture that they require for their growth is roughly more than 100 centimeter per year. So, there is a deficit. Amount of rainfall is less and the water requirement by the crops is much more. So, where do you get that additional 30 centimeter, 40 centimeter of water every year? Groundwater exploitation by the help of the tube wells and more utilization by the canal water and so on. All that water is being lost. As a consequence, the region is becoming drier day by day, and year after year, the productivity of the soil is further degrading and declining. The soil is turning out to be saline, and saline soil basically means that future cultivation, future plowing, and the growth of crops is also impacted. That is why these regions which have been a beneficiary of Green Revolution, these regions are experiencing a decline in agricultural productivity, due to which there is a decline in farm income as well. So that constitutes what is referred to as unsustainable agricultural or agricultural practices. Okay. Now, present status in terms of the land degradation and the land use pattern, that has been highlighted by the convention in its various observations as well. So UNCCD has observed that close to around 100 million hectares of productive land are degraded every year. Very important for us to arrest this, to stop this. And for that, what do we need to have? The goal of land degradation neutrality, that we should reclaim the degraded land every year. How do you reclaim a degraded land? Bring about organic farming. Bring about climate resilient agriculture. For example, growth of millets. Millets don't require that much amount of water. Pulses, they don't require that much amount of water, and they can withstand some of the climate harshness as well. So the farm income won't be lost in that case. India being one of those countries where around 45 to 46% of its labor force is still employed in agricultural sector, these measures hold a particular great importance. Along with that, afforestation programs and various different types of forestation programs like the Miyawaki method, where you grow patches of forest even in urban landscape. All of this can significantly help in reclaiming the wastelands. Droughts are becoming more common, and 3/4 of people are expected to be living in and face water scarcity by the year 2050. Currently, around 2 billion people live in the dry lands where already the water is scarce. So they are very, very vulnerable to the conditions of desertification. Now, the regions which are threatened by desertification, if you take a look at it, large expanse of the world. For example, in this area, you will observe that there is a danger for expansion of the Sahara Desert. That is the Sahel region in Africa. Sahel region, which lies to the south of the Sahara Desert, there the expansion of the desert is happening. So that will mean that very vital biodiversity regions like the Masai Mara area of Kenya, the Serengeti region of Tanzania, all the savannas, they are threatened. Now, these savannas, they host very crucial biodiversity like the lions, elephants, giraffes, etc. Once the region turns into a desert, all these species will face a threat of extinction. Then, other than that, observe, in India, we have the Thar Desert here. But with the excavation being carried out in the Aravallis due to the aspects of illegal mining, these desert regions are expanding in terms of the scope and area into Haryana, unsustainable agricultural practices in Punjab, even in the case of Western Madhya Pradesh. And also, you have the climate-initiated actions impacting the region of Maharashtra and nowadays even Karnataka. Karnataka has been experiencing dry spells at an unprecedented rate, which tells you this is a high time to take some action. The entire region of Asia, if you take a look into it, all the way extending up till Europe, the threat of desertification looms very large. And so does the case around the Rocky Mountain area in North America and the expansion of the Atacama into the Andean zone, all the way extending till the Patagonian Plateau and the Patagonian Peninsula. These are the regions which are threatened with desertification. The entirety of Australia is also being impacted due to frequent forest fires. The forest area is reducing. Victorian desert in Australia is undergoing an expansion as well. Now, here, what will be the impact? Whenever you come across the terms of desertification, the impact of it has to be known. First of all, exaggerated levels of poverty will be experienced. Why? If the region gets converted into a desert, it is a very simple chain. A region gets converted into a desert, agricultural productivity will decline and can go to zero as well. There will be frequent occurrences of droughts and famines. So whatever amount, little amount of money you have, you will spend it to buy food. And eventually, if you are a farmer, how much money would you have saved up? All that money will be spent and you will be facing the threat or a looming danger of starvation as well. This is something that we are observing already unfolding in the region of Botswana, in the region of Zimbabwe, and these areas are facing the brunt of this desertification. So this will always, whenever there is any climate event, whenever there is any kind of natural disaster, who faces the maximum brunt? The vulnerable. And when we say the vulnerable population, we mean the older population, the old age population, the poor, the children, and the women. Because in majority of the cases, they don't have the avenues to migrate from one place to another in order to satisfy their needs or in order to avail the economic opportunities. So impact on vulnerable will be much more magnified. Impact on vulnerable population will be magnified. Okay? That will be very, very high. Then, and you have to quote the vulnerable population as well. What constitutes the vulnerable population? Poor, old age population, children, and women. Majorly, these four are there. Then food scarcity due to frequent occurrences of droughts and drought cycles, famine cycles, that is going to always lead to scarcity of food items. And that will pose a larger danger to the food security in the changing world where the population is still increasing. As the population, till the population actually stabilizes, and we are few decades away from the stabilization of population, or in fact, you can say that we are multiple decades away from stabilization of global population. Right now, we need to increase the food production and the world is going to face scarcity if desertification happens. One becomes more vulnerable to diseases as well. And this includes the threat of diseases to the biodiversity as well, the population of animal species as well as the population of humans. Why? Because when you have desertification, again, you have to understand the links in the chain. When you experience desertification, scarcity of water. When you have scarcity of water, poorer population, they don't have the availability of, or the vulnerable population, many of the times they don't have the availability of clean drinking water. And that is when contaminated water exposes you to diseases, various different types of diseases from typhoid to jaundice and so on. So that is when the impact is exaggerated. More natural disasters, for example, if a region becomes dry, let's suppose a region becomes a desert. and suddenly there is excess amount of rainfall, which can happen during the era of climate change. Suddenly there is excess amount of rainfall. Then what will happen? All the loose soil and sand will start draining off. The ground will not be able to absorb that excess moisture. So you will have mass movement, flash floods, right? And landslides become more common. Slippage of rocks become more common. Disaster unfolds itself. So here, frequent flash floods, the various different types of droughts, hydrological drought, meteorological drought, etc. And this will also have an exaggerated impact on climate change. Why? Because desertification means what? A reduced area for the green space. Now you don't have that much amount of green space which was present earlier. And that green space is your source of green carbon. That is, the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere is stored in those trees around us. But in the case of a desert, you don't have those trees, so no carbon storage means that carbon dioxide and CO2 equivalent gases, they will stay in the atmosphere for a longer period of time. That means further amount of warming. That means climate change gets accelerated. So that is how the reduction of the trees will have multiple consequences. Loss of biodiversity is also another point that you can add. Loss of biodiversity. Okay. Now, after this, what were the key observations which were made in this convention? And then we will come to the key outcomes of the convention. Misuse and unsustainable management of land threatens the supply of critical ecosystem services, clean drinking water, clean air to breathe in, etc. Deepen food and water insecurity and exacerbate vulnerabilities in global supply chains, grain supply, food supply, etc. Coupled with water scarcity, rising temperature and population growth, degraded landscapes now endanger the livelihood of billions of people across the planet. Right? Now, the outcomes, key outcomes relevant for your prelims and the mains. So, global drought framework. So, this was arrived at earlier itself when you had the Conference of Parties number 17 in Mongolia, right? So, basically, when the Conference of Parties number 17 will be held in Mongolia in 2026, I'll correct myself here. So, till that point of time, this needs to be finalized. So, nations advance the efforts towards global drought framework. Just like you have the global biodiversity framework for the Convention on Biological Diversity, you have the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, which needs to, or which has set its agenda up till 2050 and in the short term up till 2030. Similarly, here you have the global drought framework. This global drought framework talks about the plan of actions which need to be taken in order to combat desertification, and the finalization of that will be held in 2026 when the Conference of Parties is slated to be held in Mongolia. And that also brings us to the important aspect that, look, when we talk about Framework Convention on Climate Change, Conference of Parties are held annually. In CBD, Conference of Parties are held every 2 to 3 years. In CCD, Convention to Combat Desertification, there also Conference of Parties are held every 2 to 3 years. Here you have a multiple choice question, the scope of which being asked, a statement can be asked that the Conference of Parties to UNCCD held annually was conducted recently in Riyadh. So you think about Conference of Party, you think Riyadh, you feel the answer is correct. But it is not held annually. It is held every 2 to 3 years. Now, there were a lot of financial pledges made by the different countries as well. So over 12 billion US dollars were pledged to address desertification, land degradation, and also drought. Now, vision for adapted crops and soils, for that also nearly 70 million US dollars were announced for climate resilient agriculture, sustainable cultivation, etc. Riyadh Global Drought Resilience Partnership. So $12.15 billion for supporting 80 vulnerable countries, including $10 billion from the Arab Coordination Group. This is something which was backed by Saudi Arabia, which was galvanized and mobilized by Saudi Arabia in order to indicate its effectiveness to hold, because for the first time, the Conference of Parties for Combating Desertification was held in the region of Middle East and North Africa region. So that held significant importance. And that is why Saudi Arabia was very active for the past year to galvanize as much amount of resources, and it has pooled in its own set of additional resources in order to have a better image as well. Because Saudi Arabia, being one of the large oil exploiters and oil producers, it doesn't have that good an image when it comes to climate convention, when it comes to the biodiversity conservation, etc. Now, Great Green Wall Initiative, which is being already under plan of implementation in the region of Africa. So there, more money was pledged. 11 million euros were pledged by Italy for the Sahel landscape restoration, and 3.6 million euro by Austria to enhance coordination. Do you need to learn the data pointer of who provided how much money? Please don't. Please don't entangle yourself in learning these data pointers. Just know that funding was provided for which purpose. That's it. Okay? And what will be the outcome of it? So the trend rather than the data becomes important. Now, for local community empowerment, to ensure that local communities are made a participant in the entire conservation measure, caucuses for indigenous people, for local communities, that was established to ensure taking in their perspectives and what the challenges they face. Because the local communities have lived in these regions for a very long time in a sustainable manner. But then you have encroachment of the urban spaces, unsustainable modern practices like utility of fertilizers, etc., which has exaggerated the level of degradation. So local communities and their input is very much required. Sacred Lands Declaration, presented at the Indigenous Peoples Forum for greater involvement in global land and drought governance. So these were some of the measures which were taken. Framework, financial pledges, drought resilience partnership. This was unique, galvanizing large amount of fund, more fund to the global or the African Green Wall, as well as respecting the challenges and the insights by the local community. Now, for the first time, there has been a larger call to the private sector. Corporates were called upon earlier as well to conserve nature and to play their part in nature conservation. But this time, there has been a direct clarion call issued to the corporates that, look, your contribution is very paltry, very small. They contribute only 6% of financing towards land restoration and drought resilience. That needs to be stepped up. And you will see this trend. For example, even under the Kunming-Montreal Biodiversity Framework, there was a greater call for the corporate action to bring about greater funds from the corporate to conserve biodiversity, isn't it? For climate change, more call and more amount of, in a way, participation which was urged from the corporate sector. Why? Because there is a realization that the governments of the day, they have a limited kind of purse or limited amount of money that they can give. They are bound by their own welfareist measures. They are bound by their own push and pulls. It is the corporate, in majority of the cases, who have damaged the environment. So rather than making a country responsible, it is easier even for the developed nations to talk about the corporates, that the corporates should actually create some amount of greater funding. Okay, now there are flip sides to the argument as well, that the corporates can always indicate that they have provided funding, but the reality, the outcome of it will not be indicative. That is what we are going to discuss in the biodiversity credits topic. What are the games that the corporates are playing across the world? Now, COP16 underscored the private sector's pivotal role in reversing degradation. A key highlight was the launch of Business for Land Call to Action, which encourages companies to incorporate sustainable practices. For example, let's suppose you consider a large corporation like PepsiCo. Now, PepsiCo, in its own production mechanism, in its own entire process of manufacturing, is it actually leading to degradation of land? How can PepsiCo lead to degradation of land? When it is manufacturing the soft drinks, there are some waste effluents which are released. Now, if those wastes are not properly curated and taken care of and not filtered before being released into the environment, they can lead to soil pollution, land pollution. The land will become unproductive. Once the land becomes unproductive, then no growth of plants naturally, means that region will be prone to wind action, or excess rainfall will drain away the topsoil because now there is no plant to hold the topsoil. That means what? The subsoil, the larger grain sand will be exposed. The region will turn into a desert. So many of the times corporates, in their manner of manufacturing, in their process of manufacturing, end up degrading a region, reducing it to a desertified landscape. Okay? Now, UNCCD Science Policy Interface, that whatever research activities are being carried out by the scientific bodies and researchers across the world, there is need to deploy that on the ground, and the state action needs to be taken. The countries need to realize the importance of it, and for that, technological innovation and intervention is required. And the technological interventions are happening. They are happening in the labs. On the ground, they are not being implemented. So that is why SPI. Parties agreed to continue the UNCCD's SPI. When was it established? Way back in 2013. Now, that is something which has taken a backseat and a back burner. So there was a need, and there has been a need which has been expressed to galvanize and implement those findings. Now, what is the way forward to combat desertification and land degradation? Here, I want you to think beyond the points that we have written here and that we are going to discuss here. Put that in the comment section below. Let us see how wide our thought process can be. And that is how you will also be, in a way, making your mind fertile in terms of thinking outside the box. So what are the major ways in which you can arrest degradation of land and deforestation? First of all, arresting deforestation. If you allow for deforestation to happen, the land will turn into a desert. There will be nothing holding the topsoil will be eroded, and you have the infertile subsoil which is present, which is exposed. Reforestation and afforestation programs, including, for example, the involvement of, let's suppose, techniques like the Miyawaki method. Okay. Now, this is very important for urban reforestation, because due to the looming threat of urbanization, and urbanization is a reality, due to that urbanization levels, you have seen that various different green areas, their space is reducing. As more rural to urban migration is happening in many of the parts of the world, the larger threat of degradation is a reality. Agroforestry, again something which has been indicated as a success that India has shown in the latest State of Forest Report 2023. Agroforestry means what? That a farmer, along with the farmland, also plants various different trees. It increases the green cover. It improves the agroecology, improves the region's ability to hold moisture and to absorb more amount of water. That makes the region water sufficient and drought resilient as well. So agroforestry needs to be promoted. Habitat restoration for the critical biodiversity, water management techniques like, for example, you have rainwater harvesting, etc. Okay? Sustainable agriculture, yes, definitely. Promotion of coarse grain production, yes. Hydroponics to save water. Okay, that can be done, but then in that case, how do you arrest degradation and desertification? Right? Crop rotation, very good. Organic farming, water conservation and management, we have already talked about, but yes, good. Good points are there. Very good. Think about it a bit more. So in this topic, what we have discussed, what is UNCCD? Where does it get funding from? Conference of Parties number 16 was held where? What were the key outcomes of that Conference of Party? And so on. Now, this is a previous year question which UPSC has asked earlier. What is or are the importance or importances of the UNCCD? It aims to promote effective actions through innovative national programs and supportive international partnerships. It has a special or a particular focus on South Asia and North Africa regions, and its secretariat facilitates the allocation of major portion of financial resources to these regions. It is committed to bottoms-up approach, encouraging the participation of local communities or local people in combating desertification. Select the correct answer. Which of them is correct in terms of UNCCD? Let me know. Which is the correct one out of this you think? A. Okay. So, let me know the others as well. One only is by Akash Monu. You're saying C. And now you're flipping to D. MK correct. Haldar correct. Kaushik, Subhash, Suprabha, Pavan, Malaya, correct. So in this case, Utsav, correct. Bhanu, very good. So here, it aims to promote effective actions through innovative national programs, is correct. It has a special or a particular focus on South Asia and North Africa regions, incorrect. Across the world. It is committed to bottoms-up approach. We have seen the participation of the local communities have been promoted. So here, the correct answer is going to be C, 1 and 3 only. All of you who have given the correct answer, majority of you have. Palak, Madhu, Munna, all of you. Very good. Now, UPSC has been asking multiple questions associated with this in the mains exam as well. The process of desertification does not have climate boundaries. Justify with examples. Now, here, what is it that UPSC wants to ask out of you? UPSC wants you to establish a linkage between how degradation of land leads to desertification. Okay. How the land degradation will lead to desertification. That is what UPSC wants you to establish. So first of all, how will you approach the answer? So in the intro, provide the definition of desertification. What do you understand by desertification? I have given the intro or the definition in the PDF itself so that it is easier for you, right? Then, when you start the body, then you talk about that desertification has got two aspects and use the chart here, a kind of a flow chart. So, desertification can have or can be caused by two aspects. This will indicate to the evaluator that you are aware of the desertification happening in Africa as well, desertification happening in Central Asia as well as desertification experienced by countries like India. So desertification happens because of two reasons. One is expansion of the existing deserts, and second is degradation leading to desertification. Now, degradation leading to desertification, it does not have climate boundaries. That is what then rest of your answer is going to concentrate upon. So here you talk about the impacts such as land pollution, deforestation, changing land use patterns, unsustainable agriculture, overgrazing, over-irrigation, excessive use of fertilizers, chemical pesticides, all of that you list out. Then you establish a chain that how degradation leads to reduced soil productivity, means lack of natural vegetation, means the topsoil gets eroded, and that will lead to desertification. Eventually, in the conclusion, this provides you with the scope to write a way forward as well. So in the conclusion, as the world population is going to increase, the countries are going to need, or the population requires, food security. Unless and until cohesive action against desertification and arresting degradation are taken, this is a danger which will haunt us in the coming decades. If this is a 15-marker question, then a 15-marker answer if you have to write, then you also have to mention the initiatives like the Green Wall, the initiatives like the Bonn Challenge, the concept of land degradation neutrality. All of that also has to be included. And when you write these pointers, please do not do the mistake of simply writing the pointers and it getting lost in your voluminous answer. Underline them, highlight them, draw a kind of a larger rectangle when you are writing land degradation neutrality and the concept about it. Bonn Challenge, underline it. You want the evaluator to look into those details that you have to provide and that you have provided. These small tweaks when you do in your answer, that is sufficient to give you an advantage of around 1.5 to 2 marks every answer. Think about it. You have 20 questions in one GS paper, 2 marks per question, 40 marks advantage, 1 GS paper, 4 GS papers included, 80 marks advantage, means the difference between appearing for the prelims next year again or getting your name in the merit list. So do try to write the answer and get it evaluated. Now, then the next topic, which is quite interesting. Something that we have covered in the classes earlier as well. But then now a particular year and time frame has been put into it. Researchers have basically studied the prehistoric rock in Japan, and that has revealed clues to ocean anoxic event. What is oceanic anoxic event 1A? So researchers have indicated, and various researchers have actually brought to light, that long time back, around 119 million years ago from present, there was a spurt of volcanic activities across the globe, leading to eruption of basaltic lava in most of the cases, basaltic lava throughout the regions of the world, which depleted the oxygen quantity across the global oceans, which was responsible for mass extinctions in the oceanic regions. Earlier also, this was a known fact, but it was understood that this happened somewhere between 90 million years to 120 million years ago. The researches which have been carried out in the region of Japan have triangulated or have basically specified the area or the time to around 119.1 million years ago. This event of excessive volcanism is said to have continued for almost 1 million years. Global oceans, including South Pacific, had creation of large igneous provinces. And large igneous provinces means so much amount of volcanic activity, huge amount of igneous rock deposits were observed. And that impacted the oceanic life. The oceanic oxygen, that got removed. So you can imagine how many marine species would have died. So here, rocks from Mount Ashibetsu in Japan have revealed important information about an ancient global environmental crisis, which choked the oxygen from Earth's oceans. Saksham, does the electroplating of metals by metal anodes also? Yes, it does. Any industrial process, if it is not treated properly, it will lead to. Yes. So it choked the oxygen from the Earth's oceans. So that means oceanic water became anoxic or hypoxic. Anoxic or hypoxic, which means what? It is depleted of oxygen. When it is depleted of oxygen, which means what? There will be creation of massive dead zones. Dead zones as in no particular species can exist in that area. They will die. Mass deaths, mass extinction, right? So it was one of the largest disruptions of the global carbon cycle and climate and the entire climate system in the past 200 million years. So you can imagine the amount of volcanism and volcanic activities which did happen. So the researchers have indicated that it was in the region, now understand, 120 million years ago. That was the time when India was still not in its present position. That was the time when India had just started moving away from Gondwana land. At that point of time, it is predicted that even the region of South America and Africa were joined. North America and Europe had just started separating. So at that point of time, the events which happened in the region of the Pacific, even in certain areas across to the south of Europe, because earlier studies had been carried out in the region to the south of France. They also indicated, the rocks indicated a similar kind of event sometime in the past. So these immense amount of volcanic eruptions that have indicated that yes, there was a complete depletion of the oceanic region. Now let us understand this anoxic event in slightly greater detail. Let's suppose there is an ocean, oceanic water, let's suppose. Now there is such immense amount of volcanic eruption which is happening almost everywhere underwater. Means what? Immense volcanic activity means that the sea surface temperature or sea temperature will indicate a rise. When the sea temperature indicates a rise, then what happens? The water in the ocean is unable to absorb CO2 anymore. Generally, the oceanic water absorbs CO2 from the atmosphere. But when the sea surface temperature starts rising, then the water is unable to absorb CO2 anymore. Rather, the water becomes a net emitter of CO2. CO2 is emitted. From being a sink, it becomes a source of emission. As this happens, means more greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. So, global temperatures rise. Global temperatures rise. Also, this underwater volcanic event will mean what? That there will be more solidification of molten materials. Hydroxides will be formed. So, oceanic oxygen will be consumed. Oceanic oxygen is consumed. Right? When this oceanic oxygen is consumed, means what? Means the species have lesser amount of oxygen at their disposal. Means what? The species will die. Dead zones. When you have the presence of dead zones, right, you have lot of dead species. Now, otherwise or under normal condition, these dead species, they will be decomposed by various different microorganisms. Majority of the microorganisms are aerobic, that is, they require oxygen, but it is already a dead zone or a hypoxic water, oxygen is not there. So that is where the dead species very slow rate of decomposition. Rate of decomposition. That means carbon is retained as it is underwater. Carbon cycle is disrupted. Also, there will be, due to the volcanic eruption, there will be increased concentration of CO2 within the oceanic region as well. This increased concentration of CO2 will consume the carbonate ions and will convert them into bicarbonate ions, leading to ocean acidification. This ocean acidification will mean what? This will mean that the calcifying organisms, like the shell-bearing organisms, they are unable to manufacture their shells anymore. Right? Species like, for example, mollusks, crustaceans, crabs, they are unable to have those shells anymore. Corals will be unable to form the calcium carbonate anymore. So what will this lead to? Mass bleaching of the corals. Mass bleaching would also be initiated by the sudden rise in temperature. But when you have mass bleaching, zooxanthellae population will decline. That means what? Zooxanthellae carry out photosynthesis and produce oxygen. So, more reduced oxygen. Further, reduction in oxygen supply. Reduction in oxygen supply. Right? And that further reduction in oxygen supply would exaggerate the formation of these dead zones. There will be more dead species in existence. You see, around 100 million years back, the sea surface temperature was much higher than what we experience today. It was on an average around 4 to 5 degrees Celsius higher than what it is today. So obviously the sea level also was higher due to the concept of thermal expansion, that when you heat the water body too immensely, water tends to expand, just like any state of matter. So water did expand. And it is estimated that the height of the sea level at that point of time was around anywhere between 15 to 25 meters higher than what today is. So many of the regions that you see overland right now, many of them were submerged during these events. So this is what is an anoxic event. This can be initiated only if there is a massive global cataclysmic event like simultaneous volcanic eruptions. It was not the first time that it happened on planet Earth. Let us be very clear about that. Planet Earth had experienced this previously as well, multiple times. But this was one of the recent ones. Okay, there was another, and there have been research papers published about this event also happening somewhere between 90 to 95 million years ago. But then this is the first concrete evidence. It is up for peer review right now, but it is one of the first concrete evidence based upon study of tuff, pumice, and various different compounds of volcanic rocks, indicating that the region was depleted, the oceanic region was depleted in oxygen. And why it is important is that it corroborates an independent finding which was done to the south of France earlier, indicating a same kind of event at the same time interval. So that provides a further proof of evidence to the earlier event and incident. Okay, so that is what we refer to as the anoxic event, right? What were the impacts? Sudden rise in sea surface temperature, mass extinctions. It is said that the ancestors of the blue whale which we know as the giants of the world, the largest living species that we see. So the ancestors of the blue whale, who were much, much larger, many times larger than the blue whale, they went extinct at this point of time because the oceans did not have enough oxygen to support the large metabolism. Mass bleaching events further leading to hypoxic condition, ocean acidification impacting many of the species of calcifying organisms, slow decomposition, which means carbon was captured, right? and eventual formation of calcareous rocks. So every few million years, whenever there is excessive volcanism, the proportion of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere increases. And that excess carbon dioxide is then captured by the rocks, the ground surface, etc. And that is how. Why? Because that excessive carbon dioxide gets converted, it reacts with the rock surfaces, forms carbonates, and forms various different compounds eventually. Okay? So I hope this is something which is clear. Now let us take a look at the practice question. Which are the possible outcomes of massive underwater volcanic events? Creation of hypoxic waters, faster rate of decomposition of organic matter, coral bleaching, rise of sea surface temperature. Select the correct answer from the codes below. Do let me know which of them is correct. Oil spilling also, in what sense, Palak? Which of these are correct? B. Okay. Pankaj, Pavan. Okay. So here, creation of hypoxic waters is correct, right? Faster rate of decomposition, no. This is wrong. Because aerobic microorganisms which carry out decomposition, they cannot function anymore. So this is wrong. Coral bleaching will happen and rise of sea surface temperature will also happen. So the correct answer is B. That is only 3. Good job. Everyone who have done it correct, very good. Now, then we come to the another article which was particularly stressed upon in Down to Earth magazine, that is agriculture and the impact on biodiversity. Now here, Pankaj, how the CO2 is converted into bicarbonate ion. So what happens is that you have excessive CO2, it reacts with water molecules first of all. And that reaction with the water molecules, that produces some amount of carbonate as well. That reacts with the other carbonate ions which are present in the water to produce bicarbonate ions and H+. That H+ increases the acidity of the oceanic water, at the same time consuming the carbonate ions. So that is the reaction which is initiated, which makes the oceanic water acidic as well, because acidity is what? More presence of H+ ions. So more presence of H+ plus the carbonate being consumed to produce bicarbonate. Okay? Right. Oil spills also lessen oxygen. There are multiple factors which lead to lessening of oxygen in the ocean. You have pollution, heating of oceanic water. There are multiple different factors, right? Runoff, surface runoff from the nearby land, coastal areas where agricultural runoff, including chemical fertilizers, they also lead to eutrophication. So there are multiple factors which will lead to the creation of dead zones. Okay? Now, agriculture and biodiversity. So the research has indicated, detailed research was carried out in the region of Western Ghats, where it was found that the species of frogs, their population is declining. Now, the prime reason which was attributed to about why the frog population is declining was basically the extension of agriculture. After all, Western Ghats is a biodiversity hotspot. India has 4 biodiversity hotspots. Which are those? The Himalayan biodiversity hotspot, Indo-Burma biodiversity hotspot, the Sundaland biodiversity hotspot covering the region of Great Nicobar, and the Western Ghats biodiversity hotspot. These are the 4 biodiversity hotspots that we have. Now, Western Ghats is a very critically sensitive or an eco-sensitive region. You have a lot of biodiversity in higher concentration present there. Now, in those areas, earlier the threat used to be from urbanization, mining activities, because the region is also rich in resources like iron. But ever since the court issued ban after the Kasturi Rangan Committee report, the Gadgil Committee report, the mining ban was ensured in the entire region. So after that, mining was not carried out in these areas, but cultivation of crops like paddy, cultivation or bringing more forest lands into a kind of cultivable practices, that is degrading the natural biodiversity. And that is being impacted, or that is impacting the population of certain species. The researchers have actually studied the population of the frog species and their declining numbers. Okay. Now, so this emission of CO2 all happening in atmosphere, yes. But underwater also, when you have underwater volcanic action, there also it happens. Okay. Now, recent research points to the serious effects of the habitat loss. Important microhabitat like the rock pools, means in the larger rocky surfaces, you have small pools of water which have accumulated. That is a perfect condition for the breeding ground for the frogs. The tadpoles, they germinate in that area, which protect frog eggs, and tadpoles during the dry spells are being threatened by agricultural practices. The research team compared the frog population in 3 different environments, that is natural plateau, paddy fields, and the orchards of mango or cashew. Now, the findings indicated paddy fields had the lowest diversity of frogs, while orchards were home to the fewest frogs overall, because the consumption of water is very, very high. In the last 4 decades overall, numerous amphibious populations have dwindled due to these pressures, resulting in the loss of biodiversity. Please keep in mind, extension of cultivation and extension of agriculture is the leading cause for deforestation and habitat loss across the world. Be it the loss of mangroves in the region of Myanmar, be it the loss of tropical rainforest in the region of Indonesia and Malaysia, be it the region of northeastern part of India due to shifting cultivation, jhum farming, you have large amount of deforestation which is happening, or be it in the region of Western Ghats, where the decadal study which is indicated in the State of Forest report has also indicated that there is a loss of the forested landscape in the region. So about 40% of the amphibians worldwide are classified as threatened due to habitat destruction, pollution, climate change, and the diseases which impact them. Now, the reasons why there is a decline in the species of or the biodiversity in the area. So first of all, deforestation in the region of Western Ghats. Why this deforestation is happening? Extension of agriculture, right? More areas are being brought under cultivation, extension of agriculture. Then after that, monocultural practices means what? Plantation cultivation, for example. Large tracts of Western Ghats are being converted into coffee and tea plantation. Not so much so tea. Tea is particularly restricted in the regions around the Nilgiris, but remaining areas, they are being converted into large-scale orchards of the same kind of crop for increased amount of productivity. But what that is doing is, it is depleting the soil moisture and soil fertility. As a consequence, small water bodies and water pools which could exist, that is also declining. So that is where monocultural practices are a threat to the agro-ecosystem and agroecology. That is threatened. Okay? Agricultural runoff leading to eutrophication means you provide too much of urea in the farmlands. You provide too much of chemical fertilizers in the cultivable lands. And that is leading to eutrophication, right? You have excess amount of these fertilizers or nutrients. What they are doing, they are turning the water into again hypoxic, leading to harmful algal blooms. This runoff basically is rich with nitrates and phosphates. Okay. And as they are rich in these nitrates and phosphates, basically leads to harmful algal bloom. Harmful algal bloom. And this harmful algal bloom means the water becomes hypoxic again. So hypoxic waters means destruction of breeding ground for the tadpoles and the eggs. Destruction of breeding grounds. Right? Breeding grounds for eggs and tadpoles. Means further reduction in population. Then wetland destruction is happening because increasingly these wetlands are being converted into paddy areas, paddy cultivated areas. So that also means loss of water. Climate change is a reality. Means climate change basically is bringing lot of dry spells. Dry spells. These dry spells coupled with droughts or leading to droughts is also leading to drying up of microhabitats like small pools and small lakes. Small lakes, ponds, water pools, etc. Okay. So this is what is damaging the ecosystem in the area. Now you see, when we talk about biodiversity, yes, there is a need and importance to conserve the biodiversity for greater functionality and provision of ecosystem services. But this biodiversity also ends up providing the kind of cultural significance. For example, in many of the tribes of the region, frogs have a particularly greater significance. The tribes, in a way, and you will find that in the region of the Nilgiris as well, in the region of the Western Ghats as well, they in a way venerate the frogs in order to ensure that there is substantial rainfall. These are local practices which are being followed. And that is again something which you have to keep in mind. The cultural importance. So the cultural importance oftentimes seen as symbols of rain and fertility and linked to local traditions. Multiple choice question can be framed. If a mains type of question is framed, you add this point, it will add diversity to your answer. It will make your answer different from the rest of the world who has simply rectified the content, right? So communities perform rituals where frogs are married to invoke rain. You would have come across these occurrences, at least heard the news stories about it, showing the connection between culture and nature. For example, when we talk about certain tribes, they harvest the pig-nosed purple frog for food during the monsoon season. So it is deeply entrenched with the tribal population as well. Okay, so that is something which attaches or which gives you an idea that local community is always in tune with the nature. We need to take their help. We need to understand their role as well. Now, the practice question, mains type of question which can be framed. Discuss the importance of conservation of ecosystem like Western Ghats, highlighting the dangers posed, right? So here you can highlight the examples. Frogs can be one of the example. So how do you answer this question? So when you are writing the intro for this, ecosystems, they provide a greater role, not only for the conservation of biodiversity, but also in terms of the services that they provide to us on a day-to-day basis, like clean drinking water, clean air to breathe, fertile land, productivity, etc. And also the products. That will be your intro, right? Role of ecosystem and the services, right? This is going to be important. This is something that you can write in around 25 to 35 words max, not more than that. Please do not make your intro extraordinarily large. Keep it short and keep it simple. Then in the body portion, you talk about the fact that in critical biodiversity or in the regions of biodiversity hotspot, you need to indicate, when you talk about Western Ghats, you need to indicate that it is a biodiversity hotspot. The ecosystem plays a much greater role in ensuring that the entire biosphere or the entire biome functions properly. Now, here is where you can cite the findings of the State of Forest Report. The decadal analysis of the India State of Forest Report has indicated that between the year 2013 to 2023, there has been a loss of vegetation in the Western Ghats by around 58 kilometers square. I hope you retain the data pointer that we had discussed in India State of Forest Report video. These data pointers need to be retained. Western Ghats is a critical eco-sensitive zone. So there it is important. Now, then you highlight that, and then you talk about the fragmentation of habitat which is happening. Then you talk about, if it would have been a 15-marker question, you talk in detail about the reasons for that as well. Here you have to talk about the importance of conservation. So importance of conservation, maintaining the critical link in the food chain and the natural balance, ensuring functional diversity of the ecosystem, ensuring that there is a kind of biogeochemical cycles functioning normally, the occurrence of rain due to the presence of the forest, etc. that you have to talk. Then you come to the portion where highlight the dangers posed. So what are the dangers which are posed? Diminishing population of the existing species. So what are the dangers posed for the conservation of ecosystem? So there you talk about or list the reasons. What I would advise you, that if you talk about the reasons, obviously all of them, if you mention in detail, it will consume a lot of space. So use the bubble method. Deforestation, extension of agriculture, climate change, like that, use the bubbles. It will make your answer much more presentable. After that, you talk about the examples where there is a habitat loss, and there you indicate the frog species. As an example, you can highlight various other species. Tigers are also impacted. Various species, Malabar civet is being impacted. Whichever species you can recall, you mention that. And then in the conclusion, this question also provides you with a scope to write the way forward. So here, while you are writing and talking about the way forward, talk about how and why it is important to preserve the critically important and eco-sensitive zones for the larger ecosystem and maintenance of ecosystem services. Okay? Right? Ayushi, here we need to give only Western Ghats example as mentioned. Yes, because it is restricted to Western Ghats, it would only be ideal if you give the Western Ghats and if you talk about Western Ghats. See, if you did not have enough examples from Western Ghats, then it is understandable if a student gives the idea of other ecosystem degradation as well. But Western Ghats themselves, they offer you so much amount of examples that if you don't give that, evaluator will slightly take it in a negative manner. So always advisable, bring those areas into answer. Okay? Right. I hope that this is clear and nobody has any doubt. Okay. Now, after that, moving on into the next topic, reviving India's forests. Can we include illegal poaching in the danger? You can, yes. Poaching is always illegal. Jane, please explain environmental reforms. Please. Which environmental reform are we talking about? There are multifarious environmental reform. At a local level, at the global level, in the form of conventions. When we talk about Montreal Protocol and Vienna Convention, that is also an environmental reform. When we talk about actions, policy actions like the Wildlife Protection Act, the Forest Policy, the Forest Conservation Act, the Prevention of Water Pollution Act, Environmental Protection Act, Biodiversity Conservation Act, that is also environmental reform. Then identifying and protecting more wetlands under Ramsar Convention, that is also environmental reform. Then when we talk about Plastic Waste Management Act, E-Waste Management Act, Solid Waste Management principles, they are also environmental reform. So which environmental reform are we referring to, Ajin? Please do let me know. Invasive species, definitely, Bhanu. Give the example of species such as Senna spectabilis that you can write, particularly in the Western Ghats. You have the impact of this, Senna spectabilis. Then this hurts the local species. In Kerala, to get rid of this problem, you had Project Vanikaran, which was initiated. So that you can write about. Then you can also talk about the red-eared slider turtle. That is also one of the invasive alien species. Eared slider turtle. Then after that, one of the major invasive alien species of plants, which has rendered the Nilgiris to be very dry, drier than normal, is what? Is the growth of eucalyptus. That also you can mention. Lantana camara, yes, but Lantana has more of its impact in the region of Nilgiris. You can highlight that. But also in central India, where the impact is vociferous. Okay. UNDP is not an environmental reform, Ajin. UNEP is basically an organization which was created as an outcome of the Stockholm Conference of 1972, the Conference on Human and Environment, where you had the identification of the triple threats to environment, that is pollution, climate change, and the loss of biodiversity. Ever since that point of time, UNEP has been instrumental in not only measuring and gauging the environmental degradation, but also launching various environmental programs. It comes out with the detailed report like the emission gap report, the adaptation gap report before the conference of parties to keep a track of where the global action is being initiated for combating climate change and for the environmental degradation. UNEP is also instrumental in providing the scientific inputs to the international or the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that is IPCC. That IPCC was formed as a result of the initiative of WMO and UNEP in 1988. And ever since that point of time, it has been publishing a kind of the assessment reports. Till now, 6 assessment reports have been published. The outcome of the first assessment report was the holding of the Earth Summit in 1992 at Rio de Janeiro. So that is what I would suggest to you, that approaching environmental reforms like this, it will never give you a detailed idea required for UPSC. What I would suggest to you, if you take a look at the previous UCAN sessions or the previous environment sessions, or if you attend the classes, then we talk about a kind of chronological order beginning from 1971, Ramsar Convention for wetlands, 1972, Stockholm Conference, the national legislations, which are also very important. Then you will gain an overall perspective. Don't approach them in a kind of a nitpicking island manner. Gain an overarching view, so that any changes which happen thereafter, not only will you be able to understand them, you will be able to comprehend them as well. Okay. Now, yes, Bhanu, that is correct. Ayushi, eucalyptus depletes the moisture reserves. Yes. And what would be the initial step towards saving endangered species at an stop deforestation, increase the amount of monitoring and implementation of conservation measures in the reserved forest areas, even in the private community level of forest, increase the amount of surveillance, ensure there is no illegal deforestation or lumbering activities which are carried out, ensure to understand the forward and the backward linkages of the individual species, maintain proper pools of water harvesting and water retention capabilities to ensure water sufficiency, climate resilient cultivation, and climate suitable infrastructure for irrigation to be developed, and naturally suitable crops and trees to be grown in a region. This is what you can understand. Okay. Now, then coming to an article which has appeared in the Hindu newspaper, that is Reviving India's Forest. Now, this is a follow-up article to the India State of Forest report. That India State of Forest report is relevant. Again, I would repeat myself. So, we are not going to go into the details of the report. Another video is there on the channel. Here, what does this article tell you? Now, what is it that as an outcome you have derived from the India State of Forest report? That the total green cover of the country has increased now to around 25%. Isn't it? As per our National Forest Policy, when was the National Forest Policy arrived at? Are we aware? National Forest Policy. When was it arrived at? This National Forest Policy was arrived at, very good, Janardhan, beautiful, was arrived at in 1988. Good, Bhanu. Now, this is when it was arrived at, with the aim of increasing the forest cover, to 33% of the geographical area, of the country. Right? Now, the latest forest report has indicated that 19 states and UTs have achieved this target, reached and crossed the target. Right? So there are a lot of positives to be derived out of the report. And you will have various circles of policymakers, opinion setters. They are celebrating this increase which is indicated in the report. But simultaneously, the article highlights that it is not so black and white. There is a lot which needs to be pondered and understood in the nuances of the report. Right? Sir, I don't understand what is the rationale behind including tree and coffee plantation under the forest cover. See, the reason behind that is when we talk about coffee. Now, coffee as a plantation crop grows well only in shade. So, whenever you visit any coffee plantation, when you take a look at it from above, you will never be able to see the coffee plants because you will have overarching trees, very tall trees nearby. So the entire region will give you an appearance of a moderately dense forest. That is why it is considered under, it is not as if you have individual small coffee shrubs which are counted as a green cover in that case. It is basically, the region is always going to give you the appearance of a dense forest, a moderately dense forest, because the entire coffee plantation will have numerous number of trees. So it counts in the category of a kind of agroforestry. That is why these plantations were considered. Because you have bamboo plantations as well, you have palm plantations as well, all of them, and even in the case of the coffee plantations, these coffee plantations, by the way, you will find the presence of some of the biodiversity in the region as well. Unique species of birds, for example, you will find them to be present in these regions as well. That is why it is considered, even though ideally you should only consider the forest region, but when you consider the entire green cover, so these areas have been covered under tree cover. They have not been included under the category of forest. They are included under the category of tree cover. That is the difference. Okay. Now, here, the lacunae indicated or which has not been highlighted by the report, the drawbacks which remain hidden under these achievements. That is what needs to be talked about, and that is what needs to be discussed. So according to the new India State of Forest report, 25% of India's land is covered by forests or trees. On its face, a healthy figure and a step closer to the National Forest Policy's prescriptions. But big numbers always hide problems. You see, when it comes to forest conservation measures have been initiated in our country since the 1800s, since the time of the colonial era. Now, the Forest Conservation Act of 1927, that had a very insular view of the forest. Insular view as in, if you want to protect the forest, don't allow anybody to go near the forest. The forest would be protected. That is why the Britishers eventually resorted to arresting the tribal population before the rainy season, etc., so that they would not carry out grazing activity. That was their entire aim or the procedure for protection of the forest. Now think about it. A country like India, with so many different types of tribal population and so many indigenous communities spread across different parts of India, can you realistically protect forest by not allowing any individual to go there? No. Where will the rest of the people or the forest dwellers go? They have their rights. They are associated to the land for centuries and for millennia possibly. So that is why they need to be protected. They need to be conserved. That is when the Forest Policy or the Forest Conservation Act 1980, the Forest Rights Act 2006, these are some of the landmark achievements of modern India in terms of conservation of forested region. Right. So, two significant achievements in this regard were Forest Conservation Act 1980 and Forest Rights Act. Now, you see, now we have covered it in the previous videos. When we talk about the Forest Conservation Act 1980, it basically classified certain regions as reserved forest, identified the reserved forest declared as per the 1927 Act. But it also opened the window for many of the state governments to misutilize the provision. The state governments would not declare a region as a forest and they would divert it to mining purposes. The corporate, then the private sector friends of the state governments, they would approach them and the region would not be declared as a forest, it would be converted into a mining region. You see this kind of an activity happening in Tamil Nadu, in the region of Karnataka, in the region of Maharashtra, in the region of Kerala. Almost in all the states which were forested, you have these diversion of forests. Massive and large-scale deforestation has happened. Northeastern regions as well. Massive deforestation has happened. That is one of the reasons why the forest policy was set up. But more importantly, to monitor what is the change in the forest area and the green cover from 1987, India State of Forest Report as a biennial exercise was carried out. Now, this exercise gives you various different data pointers. But then there are certain dangers which are indicated, which are not emphasized that much. Forest fire. Now, it is true that this time's report has indicated that the events of forest fire have declined as compared to previous couple of years. But still, the number of forest fires are abnormally very, very high. Then, limited conservation resources. Enough resources are not galvanized for conservation processes. That is indicated by a decline in forest area even in the reserved forest regions. Right? Developmental pressure, urbanization, migration, climate change, lumbering, particularly of certain species of, for example, when we talk about the trees like red sanders, movies and lot of popular stories have revolved around them. Then felling of trees like teak, sandalwood, smuggling them across the borders, overgrazing, right? Unsustainable tourism, rise of invasive alien species, all of them are the rising dangers, right? Now, there is a deforestation cycle also, which is not being talked about in that vociferous terms. So, what is that deforestation cycle? The target talks about forest cover. It talks about the green cover. And 25% includes both forest and the tree cover. Yes. Has all the acts and reforms been covered in the environment course? Yes, in the environment course, even in the upcoming environment sessions, which will be held next month, it will be covered again. In some areas, there is 10 times increase in forest fire. Yes, that is correct. Now, red sanders and sandalwood both are different, my dear Saurabh. They are not the same. Okay, please understand. They are different. One is a moist deciduous. Red sanders is dry deciduous. Typical in the Sheshachalam region of Andhra Pradesh. Deciduous. This is moist deciduous. Requires greater amount of rainfall. This can be found across the country. A shorter growing time. Red sanders has a longer growing time. This has been included in the Appendix 2 of CITES. Appendix 2 of CITES. That is why it was in news throughout the past couple of years. India was suffering because of this. This is in news because it has been put under endangered category by IUCN. So both of them are very, very different. The regions are very, very different. Okay? Right. Now the deforestation cycle is also not talked about. When we talk about deforestation cycle, what does that tell you? Basically, when let's suppose a land has been deforested, the trees have been cut off. So in that case, what happens? The trees normally give out vapor into the atmosphere by the process of evapotranspiration. But when you deforest a particular region, this water supply gets cut off. Fewer trees means less moisture back up into the clouds, which means increased amount of drought, which means the failure of the trees to sustain themselves. So any region where you carry out deforestation, that region will be devoid of natural vegetation in the coming years, right? Deforestation leading to this cycle is important even in the aspect of desertification. Deforestation leads to land degradation, and land degradation leads to further lack of moisture and lack of growth of trees, of growth of vegetation. Okay? And this exaggerates climate change and droughts. Exaggerates impact of climate change, and droughts. Okay? So this cycle is relevant. This has been indicated by UNEP in its report. Now, after this, some of the lacunae have also been hidden by the, or not indicated by the report to that extent, as per the article in itself. So there has been a decline in very dense forested region. Now, very dense forested areas, those are the regions where the canopy cover is greater than 70%. Now, they will have the ability to house certain unique kind of species, where moderately dense forest or open forest, they won't have the same ability. So, decline in very dense forested region holds a significance. And then, afforestation programs which are carried out by the corporates, by the various different NGOs, etc. Now they will replace the very dense forest with a moderately dense or an open forest. So in a way, you are replacing a region with abundant ecosystem with a region which is maybe not having that ability to support the ecosystem or that ability to store carbon as well. And here you have to understand that when you carry out afforestation programs, while on the face of it, it might be termed as a success, but in reality, you might end up planting only one species of trees, one kind of tree, for example. Now that will kill the species diversity, genetic diversity in a region. The herbivore species won't get adequate food. The entire food chain and the food web will be impacted in the long run. Then loss of forest in critical areas like the Western Ghats, right? Like Western Ghats. Now this has been highlighted by the report, but the argument is that enough emphasis is not being given into that. Why is there a celebration of coverage of 25% when the talk should have been that these are the lacunae? Shrinking of mangroves in the region of the Kutch and the Andaman Nicobar Islands. And this report also lacks details about when we talk about carbon sequestration potential of the degraded land, any particular land which has been degraded or has been deforested, there would be certain activities which are being carried out in that land. Now that will pollute the environment more. So in a nutshell, what is the overall loss of carbon sink that we are facing? That needed to be highlighted in the report as well. Now, what is the way forward in simple terms? How do we ensure that we are able to achieve the principles, the goal that is set by the international conventions, and more importantly, by us ourselves, to ensure that the conservation of biodiversity, the conservation of ecosystem is done? First things first, we need regular monitoring. That regular monitoring, it is not happening as in a verifiable manner and in a timely manner as it should, right? So that should be very, very regular. So regular monitoring, identification and conservation of critical habitats, particularly the regions of, especially regions of high biodiversity. Okay. Then control measures for forest fires, particularly in the states like Uttarakhand, Odisha, Chhattisgarh, even Tamil Nadu. There needs to be certain standard operating procedure for how forest fires need to be prevented and protected. Which kind of trees are depleting the moisture of the region? Those trees, invasive alien species, should not be allowed to grow. Strengthening anti-smuggling laws, attention to mangroves, sacred groves in particular, arresting the growth of invasive alien species, climate resilient tree types, and involvement of local community in the action for prevention of deforestation and maintenance of carbon stock and the wood stock as well. So these are the way forward that you have to make a kind of notes of. Awareness and capacity building, yes, definitely, right? Now, their use is different red sanders, yes. Connected to some industries which make furniture from mango and acacia wood, and then they export it. So this practice is helping our economy, yes. Forest cover, here 25% includes both forest and tree cover. That is true. That is true, Saurabh, that overall the green cover is 25%. Forest cover is not 25%. That is what we have covered even in the case of our the state of forest report video, and that is what I am trying to get at, that 19 states and UTs have achieved that forest cover of 33%. You have some of the regions like Lakshadweep, like the northeastern state of Mizoram, like Andaman, where the forest cover is more than 80% as well, and in case of Lakshadweep, more than 90% as well. So you have certain micro regions also where the forest cover is much more. Okay. Now I hope your question is taken. I was answering your other question where you basically claimed that red sanders and sandalwood is the same. That is what the argument was, that they are different. Okay. How local community protect. Lalita, because local community always has co-lived and coexisted with the forested ecosystem. They know the local landscape, they revere the local forested region, they know the practices of conservation of water, they know the practices for prevention of the forest fire. So their input should be taken. Okay? That is the entire concept even when we talk about the access sharing and the conservation of biodiversity. Plan urbanization as well. Good. Any other doubts which still prevails? Please do let me know. Now, coming to biodiversity credit. Now, this concept of biodiversity credit, you basically have this credit being issued by WEF. That is relevant for your prelims. World Economic Forum in 2022 launched the concept of biodiversity credit. So let's suppose as an organization, as a country, you take a particular measure for conservation of biodiversity, be it for the conservation of a forested landscape, be it the conservation of a particular species. Let's suppose as an organization, you want to indicate that you are environmentally more responsible, more accountable. You ensure that you take an action for conservation of butterflies across the region of the Western Ghats. So the actions that you take, for that you will be awarded with biodiversity credit. Now this credit functions in the same way as and when we see the operationalization of the carbon credit market. Now, in the case of carbon credit, what happens? If you destroy or if you emit carbon dioxide or greenhouse gases, and if you exceed the target, you can then buy credits or invest in cleaner energy form and get those credits, and that can be used to fulfill the target. Similarly, organizations as well as countries, if they are destroying the biodiversity, if there is a natural degradation of biodiversity, they can initiate actions which aim to prevent and preserve the biodiversity, and that is for which they will be awarded with credits. So that is the concept of biodiversity credits. However, and there are a series of articles which Down to Earth magazine has done over the past couple of months. Now, amongst those series of articles, there is an increased misuse of this biodiversity credits. For example, let's suppose, in simplest of the terms, I am an organization A. I take an action for the conservation of, like we talked about, frogs and their diminishing population in Western Ghats. Now what I do, I basically make a claim that for these frogs you need, and the survivability of frogs, you need various different pools of water. So I dig up several ponds. I show that I have invested 20 crores in this. And I say, I make a claim based upon an individual that works for me, an environmentalist who works for me. It is very easy to find these environmentalists. I say that, look, I have taken an initiative for the conservation of critically endangered frogs in the region of Western Ghats. I will be given the biodiversity credit immediately. But you tell me honestly, if today I dig up a pond in the region of Western Ghats, will that ensure that the frog population will rebound? No. It takes a long period of time. It is not something which happens overnight. It can have a short-term, medium-term, long-term impact. Maybe despite digging up the pond, the other ecosystems are not taken care of, and here I have a pond, all around it I have agricultural farmlands, and these farmlands will drain phosphatic and nitric waters into this. Will I have my frog growth? Never. Here, if let's suppose pisciculture as an activity, I allow one of my subsidiary organizations to carry out pisciculture, I will gain credit also. Neither the frogs are getting regenerated. I am earning money also. So this is how various organizations, they are flouting the norms for gaining that biodiversity credit. It is defeating the entire purpose of giving these biodiversity credits. That has highlighted the requirement or the need for reform in this particular region. Okay, I hope you understand the premise of it. Now, here, the voluntary biodiversity credit market, a mechanism where private companies fund biodiversity conservation and restoration projects, has been touted as a potential game changer. Why? Because in the conservation of biological diversity, during the Conference of Parties as well, it was realized that the countries have a very limited scope in order to deploy the funds. The countries will not be able to deploy endless amount of funds. So it is the private parties which should invest, and we will give biodiversity credits to those private parties. So this is required to galvanize and mobilize funds, private funding. Okay, to mobilize private funding. Now, however, a new review study published in the journal Proceedings of the Royal Society casts a shadow of doubt on the effectiveness in its current state, noting methodological and regulatory gaps. So here, first of all, what are biodiversity credits? This is relevant both for your prelims. This particular slide is relevant both for your prelims as well as for your mains exam. Okay, so here in 2022, World Economic Forum launched an initiative to explore the potential of biodiversity credit to unlock the financial mobilization of the resource for measuring the positive outcomes of nature and its stewards. So biodiversity credits, what are they? Verifiable, quantifiable, and tradable financial instrument that can be traded as well, that rewards positive nature and biodiversity outcomes through creation and sale of either land or ocean-based biodiversity units. Wherever, in simplest of the terms, wherever you carry out any environmental conservation measure, you can get the biodiversity credit. Now, how does it work? So very similar to that of the carbon markets. Here, the idea is to balance the overall loss to biodiversity through compensatory actions, afforestation, conservation, research, etc., attracting private funding for the conservation. The scope is immense. The future is very bright for this particular sector of biodiversity credit. So World Economic Forum estimates that even though the market is presently valued at 8 million USD, it has the potential to reach 69 billion by 2050. The Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework talks about the instruments such as the green bonds, ecosystem services, etc., and biodiversity credits to mobilize 200 billion US dollars annually by 2030. So it will be required for conservation of biodiversity, right? That is where the requirement is present. Okay. Is this legally binding? No, it is not legally binding. Now, at the same time, there are flaws in the system. What are the flaws? So, nearly all the methodologies, they sell credit based on the area which you are serving. If a large area, I am carrying out a kind of an activity of planting trees in a larger area, I will get more credit. Regardless of whether I have done the back research or not, whether I have included the diversity of trees here or not, whether I have included some planning structure for water retention or not, if the area is large, I will get more credit. That in itself is flawed. In contrast, when we use the carbon credits, we use it for a standardized 1 ton of carbon dioxide emission. In this, you don't have any such quantifiable measure. Then, they are issued for 5 years but can range from 1 month to entire duration of a project. So this is how the companies will flout them, right? That I am running a project, as long as the project is running, I will have the credits which will be accrued. So that is when the effectiveness, the outcome will always be limited. And one has to understand biodiversity conservation is complex. It is not linear. For example, butterfly population. Now, butterfly population, if I am carrying out afforestation program, whether the butterfly population has increased or not, how will I get to know within the span of 2 years or 3 years or few months? I will not. Then why should I be given the biodiversity credit for that particular time period? Also, in a particular region, if I am carrying out afforestation, we have just taken the example. Let's suppose earlier this region had very dense trees, very dense forest, and that region is replaced by moderately dense forest. Will it serve the same purpose? No. Now, when we talk about, for example, the conservation of biodiversity, is it the case that X number of trees I will plant, so many number of tigers will be benefited from that, or so many number of deers will be benefited from that? No. So if I don't have that, if I don't have a quantifiable parameter, how will I gain biodiversity credit in terms of quantified measures? So that is a kind of a lacunae which is exploited, right? Now, then the challenges, which are much more apparent. First, quantification. How do you quantify this? That is where you need experts to tell you the long-term impact. Analysis by independent global monitoring system, right? Short-term assessments are inadequate. And quantification of what? Only the number of trees that you plant. In a region, the biodiversity is culturally linked to the local population. How will you quantify that cultural linkage? The sacred groves, which are worshipped in many areas, you cut down the sacred groves and you replace them with peepal trees, or you replace them with the easily available trees. Can you quantify the loss of that culturally valuable biodiversity for the local tribes? Many of them, they worship the biodiversity. So that quantification of the cultural aspect also. We have just seen how frogs, they are venerated. How will you quantify that? And in a region, a company has carried out deforestation, frogs have been lost, deers have been lost, Nilgiri tar has been lost, elephants have been lost, and then you carry out or create a separate reserve for elephants and you say, I am conserving biodiversity. What about the other species which have been lost? So that is why, as it is seen in a very black and white content and a concept, it is a very Western point of view which the developed countries have. Developing countries, the Asian countries, the African countries, we have a much more nuanced viewpoint when it comes to the nature. We are interlinked to the nature. Historically, culturally, mythologically, nature forms a part of our lives. We cannot have a vague quantification based on area being used by the corporates to destroy the ecosystem on a day-to-day basis. Okay? Now, demonstrating additionality. In a region, let's suppose I have a particular investment. Let's suppose in Gujarat, I am a rich corporate. I have made a contribution and I have planted trees in the region. Now, I have planted the same kind of trees, almost like a monoculture. I am saying I am conserving biodiversity by investing rupees 100 crores. Now, if I add more 20 crores into this next year, what will be the additional conservation of biodiversity? How will I know? Maybe that 20 crores is only for providing water for the survivability of trees. How will I be able to quantify that? So to demonstrate the additionality of resource, whether that will have a positive outcome or not, that is impossible. Then addressing leakage. If I have carried out conservation in a region and in the meanwhile I am promoting cultivation of palm oil and palm trees, let's suppose in the critical habitat of Andaman Nicobar, then what? Who is to monitor that? All these indicate the urgent need for reform in this particular area. So biodiversity credit, what they are very vague. They are being misutilized. Various corporations, they are cheating the global conventions by indicating how much they have contributed and what is their overall conservation effort, which in reality turns out to be zero. The principles of greenwashing come to the fore in this. That is why, what is the need and what is the way forward? The world institutions, the global watchdogs, like you have UNEP, like you have IPCC, like you have WMO, like you have the WEF, the experts should come together. And in the conventions like CBD, this should be discussed, that whether we are awarding them in a rightful manner or not. And global name and shame should be followed for the organizations flouting these norms. Okay? Now, the practice question. Biodiversity credits hold a great potential, but need to be reformed. Analyze. So here, it is a 10-marker question. What will you write in the intro? Intro has to include the concept of what are biodiversity credits. That you have to include in the intro. What are these? Okay? WEF has issued them. That also has to be included. Then in the body portion, why that is important. Why is the biodiversity credit important? To mobilize the private resources, to ensure there is a quantifiable measure for, in a way, reclamation of degraded land, conservation measures, etc. The advantages that you can talk about. Then the need to be reformed. So then you will point out the lacunae. Right? All the things that we have discussed. Eventually, this answer also gives you the scope to write the way forward. That is something you will do in the conclusion. The global watchdogs, the global organizations coming together, regular monitoring, coming up with a tangible kind of outcome, long-term study, long-term penalization, everything you have to talk about. Okay? Understood? Now, some of the brief topics, basically, only the species which have been in news. If this is not legally binding, then how does it matter to the MNC? Because it is also the concept, Pawan, about the fact, see, CBD and its provisions, that can be legally binding. But in the case of the credits, now the private parties have to declare, as per the Convention on Biological Diversity, as per the outcome of Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework, the private organizations have to now declare and come out in the open with how much land has been degraded or how much ecosystem has been destroyed in the production process. So that puts them in the bad light. So it is assumed that when any organization will look at themselves in being put under the bad light, they will go for some of the curative measures. They will try to earn more biodiversity credits. And that will be indicated that this much funding I have done. So that is considered to be a kind of a nudge theory of promoting more environmental responsibility. Moderately dense forests are also known as natural forests. Yes, Saurabh. It depends on the rainfall also, my dear. When you talk about, let's suppose, dry deciduous, it will be moderately dense in most of the cases, right? Habitat-based credit can be given. Okay. Now, here, humpback whales have indicated one of the largest migration of the whales ever recorded by the scientific community. So these humpback whales, the giants of the sea, now they are known to be present both in the cooler and the warmer waters. Now, humpback whales live in all oceans around the world. They travel long distances every year and have one of the longest migrations of any mammal, swimming from tropical breeding grounds to feeding grounds in cooler water. So, what do you have to extract? Tropical breeding ground. Breeding ground is in the tropics. Feeding ground is in cooler waters. What do they feed upon? They feed upon planktons. Planktons, krills, etc. Right? Which is to be found in areas where you will find upwelling action to happen. Upwelling action to happen. Right? So they will always be found in the regions of upwelling. Okay? So here I will show you the map also of the migration pattern. Now, one humpback whale has made one of the longest and most unusual migrations ever recorded, possibly driven by climate change, possibly driven by the mating pattern to find a new mate. So there are still various doubts which are cast on why that migration has happened, but it is more than 13,000 kilometers. So it was seen in the Pacific Ocean of Colombia in 2017, that is the west of South America. Then popped up several years later near Zanzibar in the Indian Ocean, a distance of at least 13,000 kilometers. Observe this. So here, and locate these on the map. Gulf of Tribuga is where it was sighted on 10th July 2013. In 2017, it was sighted here, very close. And in 2022, it was sighted near Zanzibar. So that tells you migration has been huge, right? This is one of the longest recorded migration by a species of whale. So what can be the reason behind it? Climate change is altering the abundance of tiny shrimp like krill, which humpback whales feed upon, forcing them to travel further in the search of food. Whales may be exploring new breeding grounds as populations rebound through global conservation measures. So any of the two reasons can be at play. Okay. By radio collar, by tagging, and by various devices, we can always track them, and they are tracked in general. Now, IUCN, species of least concern, as per CITES, greater conservation by including them in Appendix 1 of CITES. Okay. So, feeding and breeding ground. That is something you have to keep in mind, right? Feeding in cooler waters, breeding in tropical waters. Okay. Now, then little bunting. This you have to keep in mind in the kind of questions that UPSC asks, that these species are, which of these species are birds or fishes like that. So, little bunting bird spotted for the first time in Mount Abu. It is a migratory species of bird. So where it is found, what is the reason? So it breeds across taiga of the far northeast of Europe and northern Euro-Siberia region of the Russian Far East. It is migratory, wintering in the subtropics in northern India, southern China. So during the harsh winter months, it migrates southwards, right? White underparts with dark streaking on the breast and the sides. Dark streaks that you observe. Okay? With its chestnut face and white malar stripes, it resembles a small female reed bunting but has black ground stripes. There is a slight difference. IUCN, least concern. Region where it is to be found and region where it migrates. That is important. Then Malayan night heron has also been sighted. So it is a migratory bird from Southeast Asia. The earlier one was, little bunting was from Central Asia and Northeastern Asia. This is from Southeast Asia, right? So has been officially recorded in Madurai for the first time near the Alagar Kovel Hills. It is known as the Malaysian night heron or the tiger bittern as well. Medium-sized and is nocturnal. Identified by the rufous neck, barred chestnut back, black cap and crest, right? Mainly found in India, Southeast Asia, Philippines and the island region of Indonesia. native to Myanmar, Thailand, and Malaysia, migrates to India again during winter. Primarily to be sighted in Tamil Nadu, Kerala, and Karnataka. Particularly feeds on earthworms and beetles. IUCN, least concern. Where are to be found? Dense subtropical forest ranging from low wetlands where it uses the stream water, marshes and swamps to sometimes evergreen forest also, which are used as habitats. Then the last species in news, the red panda, the state animal of Sikkim. This has been in news because a couple of red panda have been brought around in the region of Darjeeling in order to ensure a greater conservation. So state animal of Sikkim, small arboreal mammal found in the forests in the eastern part of India in the Indo-Burma biodiversity hotspot. In the region of India, Nepal, Bhutan, and the northern mountains of Myanmar and southern China. Thrives best at a medium height of 2200 to 4800 meter in deciduous and coniferous forest, right? They have also been found in the region slightly lower, but that is their overall reach. In India, found in Sikkim, Arunachal and Darjeeling, particularly in the region of Kalimpong. Loss of nesting trees, bamboo, deforestation, agricultural extension, urbanization pressure, that has led to the decline in the red panda population. When we talk about IUCN list, endangered, CITES Appendix 1 and Wildlife Protection Act, Maximum Conservation Schedule 1. Okay, that brings us to the end of the session. Then I have a question by Sanj. Is any mutual agreement occurs current date between our neighboring country? Generally, when we talk about the mutual agreements, you have some with Bhutan, and that is for the conservation, that was arrived for the conservation of rhinos in the contiguous zone. And also we are trying to have an agreement with Nepal for the one-horned rhino, particularly around the region of the Katarnia Ghat Wildlife Sanctuary as well. But we don't have any such mutual reinforceable agreements in the other regions of the surrounding. Okay? Right. So that brings us to the end of the session. I hope the session was helpful. Please do make notes for the portion of the species in news. If you have liked the session, please don't forget to click on the like, share and the subscribe button and put that in the comment section. Till we meet again, do take care, do revise, and a happy new year to all of you. See you again. Thank you. Goodbye.